we have to get another no, I am your father, Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker moment. And I don't think that's the case. I think The Force Awakens was set up with a very, very specific task. And this is going to be sort of the major theme that I'll be talking about later on in the podcast. But, The Force Awakens had to do something very, very specific. The Force Awakens had to bring back Star Wars. It had to right what many people thought was a wrong. I don't personally, but many people did, with the frustration with the prequels that people had. It basically had to set the reset button. And we've spent podcasts talking about this. It had to go, here's the Star Wars that you knew. We're going someplace new, but we're going to make sure that you are ready to go on this ride and you are treated to the expectation that you have of what Star Wars should be. That's what The Force Awakens had to do, which is why J.J. Abrams said they had to go backwards to go forwards. I'm of the opinion that a lot of other fans have, that because The Force Awakens did what it needed to do, and that was the plan all along, that now we have an opportunity to go do other unique, different things with the Star Wars movies within the saga. We're certainly going to do that in the Star Wars story spin-off movies. But the fact that The Force Awakens did what it did in reestablishing Star Wars, grounding it back in the galaxy of far, far away that we all know and love, now they can go out and start taking some risks. Whereas if they had gone the direction that, say, George Lucas probably would have gone with The Force Awakens. George Lucas probably, and he even complained about this, George Lucas would have perpetuated a natural leap forward in the aesthetic of Star Wars from Return of the Jedi in the same way that he, in his mind, projected a logical step backwards in the prequel movies. And I think that's what really frustrated a lot of people, was that the prequels, they did look different. They did look shiny and new, but they were supposed to look shiny and new because that was a time of a more prosperous galaxy than what we had in the original trilogy after Revenge of the Sith 30 years on. I think George would have gone the other way and sort of brought back a little bit more of that prequel aesthetic, which is going to bring me to Episode 8 in the discussion we're going to have today. He would have brought more of that prequel aesthetic, meaning, depending on which way he took the story, the galaxy would have been having to hit the reset button, but we would have eventually begin to have seen the advancement in terms of technology, different ships, things being somewhat shinier and newer again than the lived-in universe that we saw in the original trilogy, which, of course, had a lot to do as well with just the technology at the time. So what they did with, The Force Awakens was they kind of kept it in that same aesthetic and vein of the original trilogy to get us all on board. Now we can go and experience different things. And we're already seeing that. And again, I keep teasing it. What I want to talk about when it comes to Episode 8 and what we've seen so far. The other interesting thing to note, just as a side note, was I watched the movie last night, sort of as an example, The Big Short, talking about the housing bubble, the housing collapse back in 2008. And it was really interesting. The very end of the movie, not spoiling anything, but the very end of the movie, they basically throw a line up on screen that alludes to the fact that the same mistakes that we were making that brought us to the housing market collapse and the Wall Street collapse, back in 2007, 2008, we're beginning to do that again now under a different name. And when I watched that last night, knowing I was going to do today's podcast, it made me stop and go, oh, that's really fascinating, because that is a real world example of the types of things that we get in the Star Wars universe, where we keep seeing these same cycles repeat. And again, I'm back to the beginning of monologue of the podcast, talking about how you can't really get away from the politics of society without also bringing it into your Star Wars fandom as well. It actually permeates into my NASCAR fandom, but I'll save that for the Dale Jr. podcast that I'm going to do later on today. I just found that really interesting. When you look at the line, which I thought was really clever in The Force Awakens, of Maz Kanata in the castle before Rey goes and finds Luke's lightsaber, and she talks about we have to fight. And Rey goes, what fight? And she says, the only fight. It used to be the Sith, and then it was the Empire, and now it's the First Order. If you want to be cynical, you can kind of roll your eyes and going, oh, the battle never ends. But the reality is the battle never ends. That was my point with The Big Short, is that we are doomed to make the same mistakes that we're making again, just under a different name. And you see the same thing carrying out in the Star Wars universe. And again, that's a tribute to Lawrence Kasdan, J.J. Abrams, and Kathleen Kennedy for what they did with The Force Awakens in continuing the tradition of George Lucas, in paralleling what we deal with in regular society, which, of course, is one of the big reasons why so many of us are drawn to Star Wars, because it does parallel to a certain extent, what we deal with in real life, and we can relate to it in terms of the themes of battle and good versus evil. And again, that's all based off of what George Lucas planned in the first place. Looking at the works of Joseph Campbell and the old mythical stories of good versus evil, I mean, that's what made all of this work from the very get-go. All right, so let's move forward. And I want to get to Rian Johnson and what we know so far about the filming of Episode 8. Before we do that, though, I want to talk a little bit about Rogue One. We still don't have a Rogue One trailer. We don't have Rogue One anything, to be honest with you. There was some news that broke just yesterday that I'll talk about here in just a moment, but we don't have really anything apart from some vague descriptions of what the artwork is going to look like. There was news that Disney had secured the copyright, I believe. Not the copyright. Or they had registered Shadow Troopers. Now, Shadow Troopers were black stormtroopers, sort of elite stormtroopers, around the time of the original trilogy era that were mostly seen, well, actually, no, not mostly, I think exclusively seen in the expanded universe, which is now Legends. And so that you never saw the Shadow Troopers in the Star Wars movies. I guess the closest thing that you would consider to a Shadow Trooper would have been the black TIE fighter pilots in A New Hope, but those weren't Shadow Troopers. Those were just elite TIE fighter pilots. These were supposed to be the elite guard, if you will, of the Empire, these stormtroopers. And so they trademarked that or registered it or did something of that nature, which makes people believe that we're going to see Shadow Troopers in Rogue One. And as a matter of fact, we have seen some helmets that would allude to that and some descriptions from MakingStarWars.net to say that as well. And what I like about it, and what I've heard from other people talk about this as well with the Shadow Troopers, is that we know Disney went and took the expanded universe and made it Legends, and so it's no longer canon anymore. And everything that Disney produces Star Wars related moving forward is now canon, meaning it all fits within the Star Wars universe, and so those things have an effect on the movies and vice versa. What they have said, though, is that they would go back to the expanded universe and pull things from Legends or the EU and bring them into the new Star Wars canon. And I think that's really cool. I think, not being an expanded universe fan, I've always been a more of a canon fan. Obviously, I'm a big fan of what Disney is doing now and making everything that comes out, regardless if it's movie, comic book, or action figure, or, novel. I like that because everything I know fits within the universe and it all matters and relates. But I also like the fact that for the expanded universe Legends fan, that's pretty cool that they will go and pull things that worked really well from the expanded universe, now Legends, and bring that into canon. To me, that's a nice tribute that Disney acknowledges that there was some really good stuff created in the expanded universe, and if they like it, they'll bring it over and make it canon. There's a lot of talk that Admiral Thrawn from the trilogy of books that took place after Return of the Jedi, that was all expanded universe and is now Legends, might actually make an appearance in Rogue One. There's some character descriptions, not Blue. He's a blue guy with the red eyes. But I know a lot of people were huge fans of Admiral Thrawn. So they've said that perhaps there could be an Admiral Thrawn-like character in Rogue One. Now, again, getting back to what we know about Rogue One and the newest information. This just dropped yesterday. So apparently there's going to be a Rogue One comic coming up in October, a 3-issue series plus a one-shot for Rogue One in October. And not only that, there is also going to be a prequel book, novel for Rogue One called Catalyst. This has been announced. This fall, Star Wars Catalyst. This comes from Del Rey Books. A thrilling must-have prequel to Star Wars Rogue One. Let the author's speculation begin. Most people, and I agree, most people believe that the reason why we don't have anything Rogue One related right now is because they're waiting until after the release of The Force Awakens. You know, and that makes sense. We're kind of in a post Force Awakens haze, and I know for me, I was keeping in this mindset that Rogue One would follow the same pattern that The Force Awakens did in terms of promotion. I mean, if that was the case, we would have had a teaser trailer like we got, over a year out. We would have had that at the end of last year for Rogue One, and we would be on the cusp of getting a longer trailer for Rogue One here in just a few weeks. Now that should still be the case, but we had a lot of Star Wars information for The Force Awakens by this point that we're at right now, heading into Rogue One this December. And I think this is going to be the new trend. I think what we are witnessing, I think The Force Awakens was the anomaly. Well, maybe the Saga series is going to be the anomaly. Because I can't imagine that they're going to wait this long into next year before they give us something for the Force for Episode 8. I would imagine there will be something attached to Rogue One when it comes out in December for Episode 8. And most of the talk is that we should get a trailer for Rogue One here in the next few weeks. But that makes sense because we're getting the digital release for The Force Awakens on the 1st of April and then the physical release on the 5th. I would say within at least 2 weeks after that, we'll probably get the Rogue One trailer. And that makes the most sense for me because you're going to be in the middle of the biggest hype for The Force Awakens again because the Blu-ray will have come out. The digital release will have come out. There's a slew of books that are coming out, Force Awakens related around that time period, I believe, right around the same time when the movie comes out for digital and physical release. And everybody will be all into Star Wars again. And then once we've got the movie at home, we've watched it a dozen times on our TVs, then we'll get hit upside the head with Rogue One. The talk has been that it would be attached to Civil War in May. I don't think we're going to have to wait that long to get a Rogue One teaser, or even a full trailer. But again, it's tough to speculate because we haven't heard anything about this movie. I mean, not even in terms of, how good it is, or, apart from some of the stuff we talked about in the last podcast from the shareholders meeting about they like what they've seen so far, we don't really know what this is or what the hype is surrounding it. With The Force Awakens, we had more information, but we also had a lot of discussion swirling around it from a lot of different individuals involved talking about the practical effects of it, and which is funny because it actually had more, or at least as many effects as I think The Phantom Menace did. Actually, The Phantom Menace may have had more practical effects than The Force Awakens did. Be that as it may, there was still a lot of talk around, even from the actors. You had Anthony Daniels coming out and saying it was great, and you had Drew Struzan coming out, the artist who did the former posters, coming out and saying what he saw was fantastic. We don't have any of that right now, apart from Bob Iger at a shareholders meeting saying, yeah, from what we've seen so far, it's great. Well, that means nothing. So it's still a big, huge question mark. I have no doubt Disney's going to deliver. I have no doubt that if it wasn't going the way that it needed to go, Disney would have brought somebody in or would have done something to correct that. And as a matter of fact, we know that Christopher McQuarrie, who did the screenwriting or the directing for Rogue Nation, the last Mission Impossible movie, we believe he was actually brought in to spruce up the Rogue One script, which doesn't mean it was a bad script. It just means they were bringing in somebody who could go and help out with it. Not all that unlike what happened with J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan. So again, to recap, we have some comic books coming out for Rogue One. We've got a prequel book called The Catalyst coming out for Rogue One. This is all around October, so I think it's fairly